Focus. How immediate activities displace important priorities, thus undermining our abilities to do the important work of leadership.
The important versus the immediate. And the notion is that for many of you, the idea of even getting up on the balcony is a challenge because you're so busy with the day-to-day. And so for you to begin to think about how to get out from under the immediate requires a lot of work on the front end. If you're going to start to focus on how to balance the important with the immediate, you've got to have some strategies to do that. In fact, I would say for some of you, the challenge between leading, managing, and doing is probably the first hurdle you have to get over to be effective, even as a manager, never mind as a leader. If you're spending 60-70% of your time doing, you may not even be managing in the way that you need to. And to me, the definition of management is that you're working on processes and people to create certain products and services as a result of that. And if you understand that you own the processes that produce the results, then you understand that part of your job is to step back periodically and look at those processes and figure out how to optimize them, how to simplify them, how to automate those processes in order to make it easier to achieve the results, whatever the products and services are that people are trying to create. But many of you are so busy, you don't get to step back, even as a manager, never mind to get up on the balcony and think like a leader about where we need to be 2 years from now. When Paul's talking about what they're doing with the faculty senate, they're looking out over the next couple of years and what do we need to do strategically to position this campus to support the kind of research needs that are very much within its critical mission, as well as the teaching and learning. And so technology is a critical enabler when it comes to those types of things, but somebody's got to be willing to spend time on the future as opposed to the present. Let's talk about the difference between the immediate and the important. So on the immediate side, you first have email, which once upon a time was meant to be a convenience. How many people get 100 or more emails a day? All right, I mean, my sympathies to you. How many of those, how much time does it take you to process that email? Too much time.
Never stops.
Couple hours. Never stops. All the time. But let's say on average people spend maybe 2 hours a day on your email. How much of that email is important? 5%, 10%? I don't hear any more than 10. So 5 or 10%. So we got 2 hours, and 10% of that time is spent on something important. That's 12 minutes. So let's think about, I mean, how much time do you spend just churning through email that at the end of the day doesn't really have much benefit, much impact? So one of the things I suggest that you think about is not doing your email first thing in the morning. See, if you come in the morning and you start with your email, you're working from your inbox, not your outbox. You get that you're already back on your heels when you're working from your email in the morning because you're reacting to somebody else's agenda. You're looking at what they need, not what you need to do. So if you come in, Dan, and you write down 2 or 3 things you want to get done today, you've got to figure out, I'm going to do the first one before I go to my email. Then I'll actually get a little burst of confidence. I'll feel like, Jesus, I could actually get something done today. So first thing is, don't do your email first thing in the morning. Come up with an email strategy. Maybe you check it at 10. Maybe you check it at 3. Don't feed the beast, right? If you respond to email as quick as it comes in, you're only feeding people's expectations that you're going to get back to them immediately, which only makes it worse. When you go on vacation and you don't send an email for a couple of weeks, you realize, oh, the less I send, the less I get. Woo! This is a good deal, right? So the more you send, the more you respond, the quicker you respond, the more you're feeding the cycle of this escalating email volume, which becomes overwhelming. The second thing that many of you spend time doing is going to meetings. How many people spend 4 hours a day in meetings? So 75% of people spend 4 hours a day in meetings. How many of those meetings, how many people go to meetings with no agenda? How many people go to a meeting with no agenda, no facilitator? Nobody's running the meeting, nobody's in charge. How many go to meetings that have no outcomes, no agreements, no action items? Look at that, everybody. So what is wrong with you? Right? I mean, why don't you say to people, send me an agenda the day before? Oh, they're too busy. Well, if you're too busy to plan the meeting, there's no point having the meeting. Most of the work to run a good meeting is done before you get there. Because you want to think about what's the topic, what's the outcome we want, what's the process I'm going to use to get from A to B. So I think you could make an enormous contribution to the organization by helping model how to run a meeting so that it's effective and productive, and therefore maybe we don't need to meet again next week. We could actually get some agreements this time and then meet a month from now so we're not spending more time next week. And so if you take 2 hours a day in email, 4 hours a day in meetings, and the rest of the time is spent fighting fires and interruptions, right? I mean, you got interruptions all day long. You don't get any time to do any serious work. If you're in your office and you were actually trying to get something important done, what's the likelihood you're going to be interrupted? Very high, right? And so if you were in your groove doing something really thoughtful, some of your best work, and somebody comes along and interrupts you, they say, hey, Phil, have you got a minute? Now, you've all been trained to be polite, so you say yes. It's okay to say no, not right now. See, because when you interrupt yourself and you're in your groove, it's going to take you between 15 and 30 minutes to get back there, if you ever get back there. If you're doing your best work, it is a challenge to recover from that interruption to get back into the groove. And so the reason why when I coach faculty, I suggest to them, if they're doing their scholarship, they do not want to be in an accessible space. Because you can't read and think and delve and reflect in less than a 2 to 4 hour window. So you want to go someplace where you can get that kind of quiet time, and in a reflective environment, you too need that kind of quiet time. Even if it's a half hour, it's okay to close your door. It's okay to put up a sign to say to people, deep thought, come back later. It's okay when they say, Phil, have you got a minute? It's okay to say, how about it, come back in an hour, and just leave yourself the time, the leeway to do what you need to do. So I suggest that meetings, at crisis, all these things prevent you from really getting to the things that are important. But if you accept that the fundamental problem is there's too much work, then you start to think about it differently. Because if this is the queue and all of this stuff is stacked up, I've got to choose what I'm going to do in that queue. And I want to be very intentional about which of those priorities I tackle. And if I start to think about giving Kathy some work, what I'm really doing is not asking her to do more. I'm just asking her to rearrange her queue. So when you start to think about delegation, there are people who won't delegate because they're afraid. I'm afraid I'm sort of asking Josh to stay late. I'm afraid that I'm telling Jennifer that, she has to do more than she's doing now. Not necessarily. I could give Jennifer something to do, and what I'm really trying to do is get her to put this in the top 5 in her queue. That's all. I'm reordering the stack that she has. And so my boss gives me something, I'm putting that in the top of my queue someplace. But chances are if it's in my queue, I may not get to it, and if I give it to Jennifer, she could. And that does mean something at the bottom of her queue probably won't get done because it's being displaced by that. But that's okay. I mean, we're not going to get it all done. We just understand that. So I would suggest to you on page 22 that you have to figure out what are the important things first, and what are the strategies that are going to enable me to begin to really tackle those things in a way that I can get more traction. And if you're always preoccupied by the immediate, then you're not going to get more traction. As we suggested yesterday, leaders are strategic, that you need to get on the balcony. You need to think about where we need to be, not what we're doing right now. That there are important priorities. There are critical projects that you need to tend to. There are opportunities to work with your people to develop them. If you're not developing them, you're not building the capability around you that will raise the game for everybody. So you want to think about not just your leadership development, but how do I enhance the capability of the people around me, because that really is a force multiplier. You will get more done if you have folks around you who are part of this, who can take a handoff and see that it gets done. And so all of these things here are important priorities that are part of what you need to attend to, and I'm afraid they're oftentimes left to chance. You don't get to coach your people because you're too busy. Having a 30-minute reflective conversation with one of your folks is a challenge. It's a challenge to carve out that kind of space, that kind of mindset, and as a result, we oftentimes leave it to chance that we get to it.